"Mommy, can I have the blue pencil?" Emily's soft voice pulled me back from my thoughts. She tugged at my sleeve with that polite little patience she always had when we went out to eat. I smiled and reached into my purse, retrieving our little restaurant activity kit, a small pouch filled with coloring books, puzzle pages, and crayons. I always carried it everywhere. It was my secret to keeping 3 kids quietly entertained during long dinners that adults insisted on calling family gatherings. My name is Olivia, and at 35, I've learned the delicate art of dining out with children without drawing a single glare from the next table. Emily, my 7-year-old, was carefully shading a flower on her menu, her tongue sticking out slightly in concentration. Max, who was 5, was bent over a puzzle book, trying to find hidden animals, his brow furrowed like a tiny detective. Even little Sophie, my 3-year-old, sat happily in her booster seat, arranging her stuffed bunnies in a neat line. Everything was calm, peaceful, the kind of rare calm that makes a mother breathe easier. Until that familiar voice shattered it. "Oh my God, not the crayons again." Amanda's high-pitched tone cut through the gentle hum of the restaurant like a knife. I looked up, startled. There she was, my sister-in-law, dressed in an expensive designer gown that probably cost more than my monthly groceries. She tossed her glossy hair back dramatically. "This is Bella Luna, not some chain restaurant with paper menus and crayons. Can't you control your children for one evening, Olivia?" I took a slow, steady breath, forcing my voice to stay even. "They're not being noisy, Amanda. They're just coloring while we wait for our food." Before she could answer, my mother-in-law Margaret joined in, her voice dripping with judgment. "Darling, when Amanda was little, she never needed distractions at the dinner table. She understood how to behave in an upscale setting. Perhaps if you focused on teaching proper manners instead of..." She gestured toward the crayons. "Whatever this is, you wouldn't have to rely on toys." Her words burned, but I held my composure. "My children are well behaved," I said softly. "They're not disturbing anyone." Inside, though, I felt that familiar ache. These dinners had been difficult ever since James, my husband, passed away 2 years ago. Every family event since his death had turned into a quiet test of endurance, one I barely managed to pass. Without him there to defend us, his family's cold disapproval felt sharper than ever. Amanda checked her reflection on her phone, her voice smug. "Well, when Thomas and I have children, ours will know better than to turn fine dining into a daycare." Before I could answer, a small gasp escaped from Sophie. Her chubby hand had knocked over her water glass. The cup rolled, spilling a tiny puddle, barely enough to wet the tablecloth, not a single drop touching anyone. But Amanda reacted as though someone had dumped boiling coffee on her lap. "That's it." She screeched, leaping from her chair. "I can't take this anymore. You and your unruly children need to leave right now." The room went still. Conversations quieted at nearby tables. Emily froze mid-color, her lower lip trembling as she carefully set down her pencil. Max hugged his puzzle book to his chest like it might shield him. Sophie's little face crumpled, and tears welled in her eyes. "Amanda, lower your voice," I said firmly, grabbing napkins to dab at the tiny spill. "You're the only one making a scene." "No, Amanda's right," Margaret said, lifting her chin, her pearls gleaming beneath the soft light. "This is a high-class establishment, not some playground. James would be mortified to see how you've let things slide since..." She stopped herself mid-sentence, but the damage was done. "Since he died." At the other end of the table, my father-in-law, Gerald, stared down at his menu in silence, his shoulders tense. Thomas, Amanda's husband, pretended to scroll through his phone, avoiding everyone's eyes. No one, not one man in this family, was brave enough to speak up. I stood up slowly, my hands shaking slightly, though my voice came out steady. "We'll leave," I said, "but not because we did anything wrong. We'll leave because I won't let my children be treated like this." I reached down and began unbuckling Sophie from her seat when I noticed someone walking toward us. The man moved with calm authority, tall, silver hair slicked back neatly, his crisp suit perfectly tailored. I recognized him immediately. Marco Salvatore, the owner of Bella Luna. He approached with a purposeful stride. "Is there a problem here?" His Italian accent was rich and warm, but his eyes were sharp, scanning the scene carefully. Amanda straightened instantly, smoothing her dress and pasting on her most charming smile. "Oh, Mr. Salvatore, I'm so sorry for any disruption. We were just trying to explain to my sister-in-law that this isn't really the kind of place for small children." Marco's gaze flicked from Amanda to me, then to my children. Still sitting quietly with their wide, uncertain eyes, his expression shifted slightly, his tone cool but calm. "Not appropriate?" "That's interesting," he said. "Considering these children have been here before, many times." Margaret frowned. "That's impossible. We've been regular customers for years, and we've never seen them here." "No," Marco agreed, his lips curving faintly. "You wouldn't have. They usually came for lunch and with their father." He turned to me, his eyes softening. "You must be Olivia. James spoke of you often. The sound of my husband's name made my chest tighten." You knew James?" I managed to whisper. Marco nodded, pulling out a chair and sitting down without asking. "Yes, your husband saved this restaurant 10 years ago. When the bank was ready to close us down, he created a deal that kept us open. He believed in me when no one else did. He said the heart of this place, the food, the family, the laughter, deserved to survive." He smiled gently at my children. "He used to bring Emily here when she was just a baby. Said the smell of our bread reminded him of his grandmother's kitchen." Tears blurred my vision. James had never told me. He was never one to brag about his good deeds. But that was exactly the kind of man he was. Marco turned his gaze back toward Amanda and Margaret, his tone firm. "These children belong here. Their father helped make sure this restaurant would always exist. Perhaps," he added pointedly, "those who judge children for their joy do not understand the true spirit of Italian dining. In my country, family is everything." The silence that followed was heavy and electric. Amanda's face flushed red. Margaret's perfect smile faltered. Then Marco turned back to me and softened again. "Now," he said warmly, "I think it's time for something special. Emily, would you like to help me in the kitchen? Your father once told me you loved to bake." Emily's eyes widened, her sadness vanishing instantly. She looked to me for permission, and I nodded. She slipped her small hand into Marco's, and soon Max and Sophie followed, giggling softly as they disappeared toward the kitchen. Left alone with my in-laws, I finally exhaled. "You know," I said quietly, "James always said this place felt like home. Now I understand why." Something shifted in the air. Amanda sat silent, stabbing her fork into her pasta, her jaw tight. Margaret had gone pale, her appetite gone. Across from me, Gerald blinked back tears. "I remember when this place was barely more than a hole in the wall," he murmured. "James used to bring takeout home from here every Sunday night while working on their refinancing deal. He said the owner reminded him of his grandfather. It was the most I'd heard him say about James since the funeral." Just then, my kids came running back from the kitchen, faces glowing, hands dusty with flour. "Mommy," Max said excitedly, trying to whisper but too thrilled to contain himself. "Mr. Marco showed us how to make cannoli." Sophie clutched a small paper bag. "He gave us cookies. Special ones." Emily, the thoughtful one, looked up at me with big eyes. "There's a plaque in the kitchen, Mommy," she said softly, "with Daddy's name on it. Mr. Marco says he was a hero." I turned to see Margaret's carefully maintained composure crack just a little. For 2 years, she'd tried to control every memory of James, how we grieved, what we said, what we remembered. But here, in this restaurant she'd tried to force us out of, stood a piece of James's heart she never knew existed. Marco returned to our table with a tray of desserts. "These," he said with a fond smile, "were James's favorites. He ordered them every Friday when we met." "Fridays?" I asked, surprised. "He always said he had client meetings on Fridays." Marco chuckled softly. "He did. But he also made time to help me, to go over the books, explain loans, and teach me how to keep the restaurant alive. He told me everyone deserves a chance to build something lasting for their family." His eyes lingered meaningfully on Amanda and Margaret. "All families." Amanda shifted, clearly uncomfortable. "I didn't know James was involved with this place," she muttered. Gerald sat taller now, his voice steady and proud. "There's a lot you didn't know about my son, Amanda," he said. "He didn't just work at the bank. He built relationships. He helped people." He turned to me, eyes damp. Olivia, I'm sorry. We were so caught up in appearances, we forgot what James truly valued. Margaret opened her mouth to speak, but Gerald raised a hand, silencing her, something I'd never seen him do. No. Margaret, he said firmly, enough. Look at these children, our grandchildren. They're not being disruptive. They're being curious, engaged, just like their father. Was Marco nodded approvingly before being called away to another table as he left. A young waitress approached with a small leather-bound book. Mrs. Harrison, she said, addressing me. Mr. Salvatore wanted you to have this. It's a collection of recipes your husband helped save when we digitize our systems. He wrote notes in tia margins. I opened the book with trembling hands. There in James's familiar scroll were little notes about each dish. Emily would love the chocolate in this. Say don't need to bring Max here when he's old enough to appreciate the tiu cider. Another, the last entry, was dated just a week before the accident. Sophie's first birthday coming up. Maybe Marco will help plan me something special. He never gotta. I started, my voice catching, but we can, Emily said firmly, sounding so much like her father. It made my heart ache. Mr. Marco said we can come back anytime. They'll teach us all Daddy's favorite recipes. Thomas, who had been quiet throughout the evening, finally spoke up. Amanda, he said gently, I think we owe Olivia and the kids an apology. Amanda looked like she'd bitten into something sour. But before she could respond, something remarkable happened. Sophie, my young guest, walked over and placed her paper bag of cookies on Amanda's plate. Daddy always said sharing makes things better, she said, with the simple wisdom of a 3-year-old. You can have my cookies, Auntie Amanda. The gesture seemed to deflate whatever argument Amanda had been building. She looked at the small bag, then at Sophie's earnest face, and something in her perfectly maintained offside crumbled. I'm sorry, she whispered. Then, louder, I'm sorry, Olivia. I've been awful. James would be so disappointed in how I've treated him. Family Margaret still sat rigid in her flesh, but I could see her fingers trembling as she reached for her water glass. The carefully constructed world she built where appearances mattered more than feelings and propriety. Trumped family was cracking at the foundations. Maybe, I said, choosing my words carefully, we could make this a new tradition. Friday family dinners here in James's honor. The children could learn about their father's legacy, and we could all remember him the way he'd want to be. Remembered running family together. Over good food. Gerald was the first to respond. I think that's a wonderful idea. He looked at his wife and daughter. You say, ready to learn what this place meant to James 1 year later. I sat at a regular Friday table at Bella Luna watching Emily help Marco Nito in the open kitchen. Max was carefully setting the table with Sophie trailing, behind him placing the special children's men as James had apparently helped design. Years ago, the changes in our family over the past year have been remarkable. Margaret, who had once insisted on formal dress codes and perfect manners, now wore an apron covered in flour as she learned traditional Italian cooking alongside. Her grandchildren, her perfectly manicured nails were often dusted with ingredients, and she seemed younger, somehow lighter. Olivia, she called from the kitchen doorway. Come taste this sauce. I think I finally got James's recipe right. It still surprised me sometimes, this new version of my mother-in-law. After that first revealing night, she had thrown herself into learning everything about James's connection to Bella Luna. Each discovered detail seemed to crack her rigid exterior a little more, until the real person underneath began to emerge. Amanda had changed too. Her designer dresses were still present at our family dinner, but now they were often protected by one of Marco's spare aprons. As she learned art of pasta making her pregnant announcement 3 months ago had come with a humble request. She wanted her child to grow up knowing this side of their uncle. James, the sauce is perfect, I told Margaret, tasting the spoonful she offered just like James used. To describe it, Gerald appeared with Marco, both carrying old photographs they had discovered in the restaurant's archives. Look what we found, Gerald said excitedly. James's first meeting here when he was just starting at the bank. Marco kept everything. The photo showed a younger James, his tie loosened, sitting at what was now our regular table with a lot younger Marco. They were both laughing at something, plates of food scattered between stacks of papers he saw. Something special here, Marco said, his accent still strong, but his English much improved after a year of teaching. Cooking classes to our family. Not just good food, but heart family, he understood. That's what makes a restaurant truly great. Sophie climbed into my lap, her small fingers tracing the image of her father's face. Daddy's laughing, she said, simply. He was always laughing here. Marco confirmed even during the hard times. When we were close to losing everything, he would say, Marco, as long as there's good food and family, there's hope. Thomas walked in then carrying a large gift-wrapped package. Found it, he announced, the sign company. Finally finished it. Waygett gathered around as he unwrapped. The present a beautifully hand-carved wooden sign that would hang in the restaurant's entrance. It read in memory of James Harrison, who believed in good food, strong coffee, and the power of family. His legacy lives on in every meal shared. Here it's perfect, I whispered, feeling the familiar mix of joy and sadness that came with these discoveries about James. Marco beamed with pride. Now everyone who comes here will know his story. And speaking of stories, he wed to his daughter Maria, who brought out a leather-bound book we had all grown familiar with over the past year. It was our family recipe book, started with James's original notes, but now filled with our own additions. Emily's first successful batch of marinara sauce, Max's creative pizza toppings that had actually turned out delicious, Sophie's special way of arranging the antipasto platter. Even Amanda had contributed, combining her flair for presentation with traditional recipes. Time to add another one. Marco announced Margaret's perfected sauce. Recipe deserves a pajaz. We gathered around the book. I couldn't help but marvel at how much had changed a year ago. This family had been fractured by grief and rigid expectations. Now here we were, flower dusty and laughing, united by James's hidden legacy. You know, Gerald said, putting his arm around Margaret, James would love this. Not just the cooking and the food, but this all of us, together, making new memories while honoring the old ones. Margaret wiped a tear with the corner of her apron. He always knew, better than us, didn't he, about what really matters. I looked around at our transformed family. Emily proudly showing Marco her perfected dough meeting, Max and selfie decorating technique cookies with Amanda Thomas photography. Every moment, the form of dinners and stiff conversations have been replaced by something real, something warm, to James. Marco said, raising a glass of wine, who gives us more than just financial advice. He gave us the recipe for bringing family together. We all raised our glasses, even the children with their special juice cups, and I felt James's presence stronger than ever, not in the formal family portraits Margaret used to insist on or in the rigid rules of behavior Amanda used to enforce, but in the laughter, the messy apron, the imperfect but love-filled attempts at recreating his favorite dishes. This washes true legacy, not just saving a restaurant, but creating a place where his children would always belong, where his family would learn to break bread and barriers together, where love mattered more than appearances. And as I watched Sophie attempt to teach Margaret the proper way to twirl spaghetti, like Daddy showed me in Heaven, girl, I knew that sometimes the most precious gifts are discovered in the most unexpected moments, even when they start with someone trying to throw you out of a restaurant.